introductions to our speakers. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to welcome you to this session, delivering at machine speed with a focus on artificial intelligence and autonomous systems. It proves to be a fascinating double-headed session. I'm pleased to introduce, we've got two speakers today, our Artificial Intelligence Program Manager, Helen, and then Pete, a Dstl Senior Fellow, who's also the Technical Strategy Lead for Autonomous Systems. And as we said, we'll be taking questions sort of to the rear end of this session. But otherwise, I'll hand over to Helen.
Thank you, Rob. Next slide, please, Hannah. Okay, so we live in a data-rich world, and the use of data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence to help us make sense of that data is now vital. MOD has recognised the importance of data, artificial intelligence and autonomy in many recent key documents, and this view is also reflected in the Chief Scientific Advisor's S&T strategy and the industrial strategy. Next slide, please, Hannah. I'm going to talk to you about the bottom half of this slide, and Pete will return to the top half later on in the presentation. Starting at the bottom, we have the data-rich environment I just mentioned earlier, but this data is incomplete. It's gathered and stored in silos, it's at different classifications and in different formats, and it's most likely to be unlabeled. Data science can help us to order, sort, visualize, and make sense of that data. Artificial intelligence will be able to do all of that and further actions on that data that we'd usually expect biological intelligence to be needed for. It's going to reduce the burden on the human, but it needs to form part of the wider enterprise to be able to have the greatest effect for MOD. Next slide, please, Hannah. So this is an example of the military enterprise within which artificial intelligence will need to function. Data is going to be collected from multiple platforms, from government and international partners, and it's then going to need to be transformed and stored to be able to create insight and formulate actions from. This can be compared to smart cities such as Newcastle or Portsmouth, where information is gathered from traffic sensors, from air quality sensors, and from car parks to help direct and control traffic. But now imagine trying to do all of that with no broadband, no 5G, and even no 4G connectivity between your sensors and your control station. And that's sort of the effort that we're up against. Next slide, please, Hannah. Thank you. So this is a large area and it requires many skill sets to be able to tackle the problem at an enterprise scale. We think these are the areas that we need, but this list isn't exhaustive. We obviously need to start at the data and need to understand how to improve our data architectures, data handling, and the protection of that data. Coming to artificial intelligence, we need to understand the latest advances, but we also need to think about how it will be used within our enterprise, and so how it can work with minimal size, weight, and power, and how it can train on little or no training data. We need to understand how it's going to interact with the human and how we can assure ourselves it has been tested, it is robust, and that we can be assured of the outputs. Next slide, please, Hannah. So this is the approach that we're taking. It's a series of themed studies supported by and delivering through an experimentation hub. First off, the multi-domain machine speed C2 is looking at how artificial intelligence can help speed up our current decision making. And once MOD is digitally savvy, how artificial intelligence can actually revolutionize the current command and control procedures. The autonomy for ISR enterprise is looking at how artificial intelligence can help speed up understanding of the ISR enterprise, so that's intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, which then supports the decision making that I've just mentioned under command and control. And also we're looking at how AI can create an autonomous enterprise where the data is autonomously collected, stored, transformed at the optimum place in the enterprise to fulfill the overall goal of the operation rather than it all happening centrally. Lastly, there's the machine speed strategic analysis, looking at how artificial intelligence can help us understand the sub-threshold, and that's multi-source, multi-classification, big data problem. How can we sift through it to identify actors, understand the intent and potential effect of their actions and the effects of any reactions that we may make? So can you build, please, Hannah? There's a build on this slide. Thank you. So underpinning all of that is the Artificial Intelligence and Autonomous Systems Experimentation Hub. And this will provide concept use cases. It will provide the verification and validation of the code. It will provide a red teaming function. It will provide hardware and data sets. And it will also help us exploit across defence through the Defence AI Centre. Next slide, please. So how will we do this? As I alluded to earlier, we need a multidisciplinary team with Dstl, industry, academia and military staff. We plan to use a tried and tested DevOps approach, including safety and security accreditators right from the outset. We recognise many people are working in these fields already, and we wish to draw upon and link into the already established AI excellence hubs available. Next slide, please. So we want to work with teams of the best people from across all the areas needed to support the enterprise. But by working with us, you will get access to new and novel data sets, get access to our international partners, and there could even be opportunities for collaboration across these communities. We have a regular newsletter which keeps our suppliers informed of the latest opportunities, and you can see the sign up link here for it if you don't already receive it. And I would also encourage you to come to our AI Fest in October. The team have put together a really exciting agenda, and the address to register interest for that is there as well. So that's it from me. I'm now going to hand you over to Pete.
Thank you, Helen. Good afternoon, everybody. Pete Stockel. So as Rob said, I'm the lab's lead for robotic and autonomous systems, and I'm going to talk back a little bit further on some of the aspects of that. Slide, please, Hannah. So I'm going to concentrate on the top, primarily left-hand part of that diagram. It's mostly focused around the physical systems part of the applications of AI. And robotic and autonomous systems, or AI-enabled physical systems, feature increasingly throughout the FLC's aspirations for transformation of the future force. Now, everybody gets really excited about the sexy drones and robots, but AI and AI-enabled systems are increasingly ubiquitous across many commercial sectors, as we're already seeing in our everyday lives, the financial, healthcare, transport and logistics and energy and so on. Next slide, please. So Dstl, working in partnership with you guys, with industry and academia, has been instrumental so far in enabling and leading the charge for MOD to understand the state of the art of this fast-changing technology and the challenges in adopting and transitioning it for robust, assured military capability that can be deployable in the hands of our armed forces. We have led the development of many of the systems that the frontline commands are now doing capability experimentation with and drawing those towards initial service. And so, for example, the Navy's new autonomous minesweeping capability, Wilton, now entering operational service, pulls through from S&T investment and autonomous systems expertise from our underwater autonomy subject matter experts and the industry base that supports that. At the MAST 13 autonomous surface vessel testbed, coupled with a Maple UXS command and control system, are an S&T program investment and developments. And the RN now, of course, have their Mad Fox version of MAST 13 for trials in the hands of the Royal Navy. Our swarming drones research project, the fractionated delivery of integrated effects, underpins and informs the RAF Rapid Capabilities Office developing Alvina capability and provides expertise and capability to enable the new multi-domain integrated swarms game changer project. And through Project Mosquito, we are leading the next generation of uncrewed combat air systems developments. Our autonomous last mile resupply work with the Army was the genesis for Project Theseus, and that's one of the Army's vanguard projects in the new Army robotic and autonomous systems strategy. And spin-outs from the Autonomous Last Mile Challenge have recently been trialled with the Commandos, and you've probably seen that on the internet, and are positioned for the Navy's Heavy Lift Challenge, in addition to what we're doing under Theseus. And beyond that, we also have 5 unmanned ground vehicle systems Dstl owned and operated on behalf of the Navy with the half of the Army, complementing the robotic platoon vehicle systems being experimented with by colleagues in the DE&S Future Capabilities Group and adding to the utility base for these systems. And our working projects Minerva and Servitus, robotic and autonomous systems for chem sensing, and other systems are also opening the door to RAS applications in the hands of the user for some of the most very difficult, dull, dirty, and dangerous tasks for strategic command and other security users. And all of these projects created over the last 5 years have stimulated new partnerships with industry and academia and demonstrates exactly the value of the twin track strategy. We have both been rapidly advancing the technology state of the art and pursuing first of class experimentation with these prototype systems in the field to find out what works, what doesn't, doing that at pace to get things towards the hand of the user. Next slide, please, Hannah. So I mentioned that the technology is democratized, and what do I mean by this? So the underpinning technologies and information that enable RAS, such as cheap and robust sensors, dramatically increased and affordable computing power, user-friendly software development platforms, 3D printing, and cheap communications devices such as smartphone technology enabled by 4 and 5G networks are readily available and accessible via the internet. And these technologies are being diversified and accelerated through commercial markets, burgeoning applications across health, logistics, transport, and energy sectors. And much of the hardware and software required to design and build practical RAS is accessible from your laptop. And you guys are doing some of this already today. And those that might seek to challenge us and our way of life, whether they're threat states or individuals, are finding this too. And adversary states are investing strategically in developing and harnessing RAS technologies and systems. Threat individuals and non-state actors are leveraging, adapting, and deploying commercial technologies. So we've been investing in the research program and R&D activity in the key areas that help us understand what we need to worry about, what we need to protect, how we understand the emergent state of the art, and then putting that into practice in deployable and practical systems and concepts that we can take into user field trials. And whilst we've made some very good progress over the last 5 to 10 years to continue to give our fighting forces the edge they need to defend our security, we need to up our game through 3 key themes for our capability ambition. And that's really about outreach, networking and agile partnerships, like today, safe and robust operationalization, including validation and verification and trust test and evaluation, and integration at scale for the contested environment. Next slide, please, Tanner. So what does it take to deliver autonomy advantage? From a technology perspective, in the UK, there are over 1,000 AI-related startups, 12 national technology hubs, and 12 national think tanks that we can leverage and harness. We need to be more agile and reaching further in proactively creating and harnessing industry and academic partnerships across the government and commercial sector in seeking and developing solutions for development at pace. And this will require us to understand and be successful in their space, understanding their business drivers and language and new ways of working. So it's not just about the technology, it's about how we access it, how we prove it, how we trial it, and how most of all, we assure that it is fit for purpose in the military environment. And the commercial sector is not going to do all of that for defence. We can talk about what we might call the defence delta. What are the things we have to do to be suitable to operate effectively and survive in the contested environment? Next slide, please, Hannah. I think we should drop back. Next slide, please. And again. So we need to understand and engage the user at the heart of what we're doing to move more rapidly in developing solutions and get these into meaningfully representative operational experimentation, testing for and with our user community. We need to be tackling the technical engineering practicalities of assured and trusted autonomous systems with new tools and techniques for complex software verification and validation, exploring and fixing, please, the vulnerabilities that we may be aware that are there and potential threat opportunities that arise as a result. We need to understand the limitations and opportunities of connecting, corralling and managing the all-important data and information sets, as Helen has noted, supporting and exploiting digital engineering environments and approaches, and the implications of these in supporting evidence-based risk approaches for delivering trusted systems that can be assured through the regulatory communities and achieve a release to service to the hands of the user. And we need to be doing this for systems that are affordable, so they can be brought in meaningful operational numbers and operate successfully in the uniquely cluttered, contested and denied environment of military operations. Next slide, please. And tackling these issues, one of the reasons we propose an autonomy development and experimentation hub successfully, as Helen's noted, under the R&D proposition in the integrated review. And key components of this, integrated within the digital transformation agenda, are being developed hand in hand with the new Defence AI Centre, as announced by the Prime Minister last year and as Helen has introduced. And between our AI and data experts and our RAS developers and practitioners, we are fully engaged in the implementation plan for the new centre, and the new Dstl hub that we've stood up in Newcastle will contribute and be part of this. And alongside this, we are working directly with all the frontline commands to enable and take forward their ambitious plans for adopting autonomy with swarming systems, uncrewed adjuncts, and other AI-enabled systems. And although plans and funding specifics are still being developed and are to be determined, especially in the case of the frontline commands, we anticipate the funding in this area to be in the region of 30 to 40 million a year over the next 5 years. So we are investing substantially in terms of trying to uplift and step change the capability and its application for defence. But I'm going to come back to the question that I leave you with on this slide. And that fundamentally is all the systems that we operate today, we have in trials and we have in the hands of the user, all come with either the physical red button or the metaphorical red button on them, the electronic key stop. And my real question is, how are we going to work together to tackle the challenges that I've highlighted, both from a technical perspective, but from an operational business perspective, to get to the point where I can get that red button off? Because that is the final hurdle, that is the barrier to adoption, and we need to do that because we can't go to war with it on these systems. I'm going to stop there. Thank you all very much for listening this afternoon. I think we're going to open up the questions and floor to questions to me and Helen.
Excellent, thank you, Helen and Pete. Simon, please can we have the slides up for the Q&A session? Excellent. So we've already got some questions coming in. So how do you ask the question? Use your phone to either get the QR code on there, which will direct you through, or go to slido.com and use the code DSTL-1330-machine speed. And so we've got plenty of time to take questions now. I thought, Helen, coming to you first, when I wanted to ask, I just wondered whether you wanted to say any more about AI Fest 4 and sort of the, the exciting agenda you've got and sort of the ways, the sort of things that might be going on and sort of why sort of people on this call may want to attend that, and just sort of explain a bit more about some of the opportunities there.
Yeah, sure, I can do. So AI Fest is going to run over 2 days, and there are some, it's a series of talks, and we've got the talks ranging from MOD talking about the challenges of AI and how they're going to hopefully set up the Defence AI Centre, through to some industry and academic experts such as people from Google talking to us, and the ex-director of JAKE, the US AI Centre, about their experiences and points of view, but also as well, it's a really key networking event. So you can be able to understand who's who within MOD and Dstl that are in the area, but also be able to understand who's working in industry and academia in the area if you haven't already met them. So it's going to be really good. I'm really excited and looking forward to it, and I hope to see lots of people there. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. I know the top question here was asking for the contact details for that. In the chat function, I have put the email address for you to contact the team, so people can find out about sort of registering their interest. So that's AI_lab@dstl.gov.uk. Obviously, one of the things we've been trying to achieve through Supercharging Science and other sort of types of activities is sort of really sort of, as Doug Umber said this morning, sort of not just supercharge our science, but supercharge our engagement. And on that, Pete, I wondered whether or not you wanted to touch on any of the sorts of things that you and your colleagues in your area at Dstl are doing to sort of broaden that engagement with academia, industry, different types of suppliers, and any sort of event that you may well have coming up later this year.
That's a great link. Thank you, Rob. And yes, I did forget to do my own plug on this, of course. For those folks, I'll pick that up with several points. But the dark event, which is the autonomy event that we normally run for those folks engaged in MOD's autonomy S&T activity, and we've run successfully for several years now, is coming up in November. I think there's going to be some more news about that coming fairly soon. I think the date is the 25th. I think we might be at Twickenham we're allowed to do that in this strange world we inhabit these days. But yes, we will be running the usual expanded collaboration event around what folks in the autonomy space are doing as the dark event in November, so stay posted for that. One of the key ways in which we reach out, of course, particularly in the lower TRL space, is using Dstl, the Defence and Security Accelerator. Many of you have been engaged with that, and some of the challenges that we've run both through the themed call, but also in the open calls. That's one of our prime ways of trying to reach out and engage. We've mentioned the Development and Experimentation Hub and the AI Centre. I mean, one of its key drivers is to be able to both hear more of what's going on internally within the defence enterprise, but also then to enable an expanded reach out network more widely across the community. I think the real challenge for us here, and I mentioned the 1,000 AI startups, is how on earth do we get our heads around what's going on in the space? And actually, there are some questions we'll come back to a bit later on about people bringing good ideas that maybe we've not heard of, and how do we reach out to the supplier base in a partnership way. And I think we're genuinely up for good ideas in this space. I do think that if folks have got some ideas about how do I bring ideas into the space and how do we do that, I think we're open ears to understand how we do that. My real challenge with this is how do we harness the technology development that's going on, particularly in the commercial sector, and then target that, spin that in for defence, put it into the defence environment, because it's not going to be able to solve all the problems, then spin it back out again. So if you look at the way the frontline command innovation hubs are working, we're partnering with the RCO, the Battle Lab, Navy X and Octa and so on to understand how they're doing that, and the J Hub at Stratcom. So they too are busy thinking about different ways in which we can make that work. So there's a variety of mechanisms, and I think we're just testing ourselves about how wide can we and do we throw the net, and I think the answer is as wide as we possibly can, please, is the answer to that question. So happy to hear ideas on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete. It's also just bearing in mind as well that as a sort of very much as a follow-on to this session, we will be looking at running a program of SME Searchlight. So SME Searchlight is a program Dstl started in the last sort of 18 months to two years or so, sort of really trying to increase that engagement with small and medium-sized enterprises, and more details will be coming sort of your way about those. But those are more sort of a deep dive session, getting into some more of the detail and some of the challenges, and clearly some of the programs and the work we're doing on evolves and more information becomes available. So we hope to be coming out to you shortly with some of those details in not the sort of too distant future. Okay, turning to Slido. Question number one from Chris Daniels at Flarebright Limited. Pete, can you give any advice on what RAS hardware, sensors, servos, chips are likely to be accepted at Dstl? They are readily available on the internet, but so many of them are Chinese. So is this likely to be problematic?
So there's a great question. I can see, yes, it's the top of the pops in terms of the question set. So Chris, thanks for asking that question. It's a challenge, is how do we get stuff into defence that we need to protect? I'll have to be slightly careful what I say in this forum. And I think some of the answer to that is the, okay, where do we choose to invest in the UK? How do we manage the IP model? How do we manage the commercial construct that goes with that to give us potentially more assurance around that? Obviously, buying on the open market gives you, well, it's very low cost because it's amortized across a huge commercial base, but it comes with other challenges. So straight answer to your last question is, yeah, it probably is problematic, but are there some clever things we can do to put the right wrappers around things, provide the right fire breaks, understand how things are managed, protected, and understand the true threat that or otherwise that they may or may not pose. So that's very worthy of a specific conversation. I'm not going to plus up anybody's software or hardware particularly. Of course, we have gone out and invested in certain parts of the space in areas like comms, for example, through the research program, precisely to try and give us some of the capability around this. And yeah, so it's a great question. It is an ongoing challenge, balancing. I'm really interested to see what industries answer to that is, what can you offer us that is competitive to be able to do that? Question back to you guys, but in the same way then doesn't give us the same potential question marks about points of origin that we have to protect. So I think look to where we've invested in parts of the research program, but also let's have some ideas about how you can help us manage that. That would be really appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, just to jump in on that, sorry. I think Pete adequately answered it. I was just going to sort of reinforce that that is the world in which we live at the moment. So rather than sort of fighting the white, as they say in the military, let's think of some alternative approaches that allow us to just accept that fact and cope with it, which I think is what Pete was saying. But yeah, thank you for letting me put my 2 pence in there as well.
It's a double act as always. It's cool.
Thank you, Helen and Pete. Helen, I think this next question at top of the shop comes to you. So, Pete, obviously jumping if you feel that you have something to add as well. How can research projects engage with the AI Experimentation Hub? Is it available as a resource to existing Dstl research frameworks? I think it might be helpful as well for some of the callers on the line unfamiliar with what some of that means. If you could also address what the AI Experimentation Hub is as well for those who are unfamiliar with it.
Okay, so the AI Experimentation Hub is still being built. So you could sort of say at the moment it's a great picture on a PowerPoint slide, and the team are working really hard to actually now physically and metaphorically build that up. So we're probably in an initiation, I can't even say that, in an initiation phase at the moment, where we're trying to get some industry support to help us build the elements of that experimentation hub. So what we're hoping to do, as Pete alluded to, and I hope I alluded to a little bit as well, is that it's to cohere the MOD community of everybody that's looking at AI, whether that's within research, whether that's within development, whether that's within innovation and experimentation. And also to then be a sort of central front door to help bring in industry partners, academic partners, and other experts that we wouldn't necessarily traditionally engage, and sort of funnel that expertise to where it's needed. So the idea is that we're going to sort of look at a playbook of sort of concept demonstrators that we can build, go through the DevOps approach of bring it in, experiment with it, fail fast or succeed fast, and then move it on. So that's the idea for the experimentation hub. So yes, it will be a resource and a route to exploitation and a route to experimentation, and a sort of a front door internationally and nationally for everybody. But it's still, we're still building it, so I can't exactly sort of cut the ribbon and show you what it looks like exactly at the moment. Pete, you got anything to add to that?
Well, yeah, thanks, Helen. I was going to say, so we are thinking about what are the things that is readily apparent, and I think I touched on this earlier, is because of the technology and the way in which it is developing and being led largely from the commercial sector, but is the business model and the commercial frameworks that we put into this are equally as important as the technology base. So we are thinking about what is the commercial framework construct by which we enable the development experimentation hub to operate successfully. We're working through that at the moment and trying to get that out into the space where, again, it gives us the opportunity to engage widely across the potential supplier and partnership base, both it go across some of the more usual defence community, but also some of the boundaries beyond it. So yeah, we are very conscious of the need to be able to make sure we've got the right commercial framework to make this work as well. So there will be a route to do that through that. So you might anticipate calls going out, for example, for good ideas, as much as there are some. Helen alluded to some concept focused activity as well. So we are thinking through all that at the moment. And hopefully it won't be long before we're able to say a bit more, but it is in hand at the moment. Over. Thank you.
And hopefully we'll be able to show a bit more at AI Fest in October. So I'm hoping that all will become clear there. Over.
Thank you, Helen. You preempted my follow-on question, which was if we could give any of the delegates online a view to sort of the timeline. But I think October AI Fest is sort of a good indication. So thank you for that. So we'll see what's possible then. Next question from Hugh Liddell. I've introduced an Edge AI team to a Dstl point of contact, but to be met with "that's not possible, we would know if it were" response. How are you going to enable companies pushing the boundaries of the possible to demonstrate the credibility of what they're claiming? So I guess really there's a challenge there, Helen and Pete. How are we going to respond to people who say, "I've got something completely different, completely hasn't been done before"? how are we going to test and sort of receive that sort of stuff?
Ah, that's really exciting. I'm keen to know more about that one, actually. I think, you know, the way I see it working is certainly, you know, through this experimentation hub, that, you know, the idea will be that we will have some data sets, we will have this playbook of challenges and concepts that we need fixing, and it will be a brilliant opportunity for companies to come in and say, we think we can do this, and, you know, for actually to conduct an experimentation or a demonstration on that data in that scenario and show us how to do it. You know, I think I perhaps would be a little bit more humble than whoever it was they spoke to in Dstl to say, we're not the experts, you know, we don't have authority over this subject area, and we're very much looking to industry and academia to help us and guide us, so that we can actually apply the very best thinking and perhaps even technologies to our problems. So yes, I think, you know, the door is open of, if you've got something that's innovative and novel and something completely new, we definitely want to see it and want to be able to understand how it will work and what advantage it will give us. Pete?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great challenge, isn't it? And it is difficult. I would on the one hand say, well, we absolutely know we don't know everything and have all the best ideas, but then I would also push the challenge back a bit and say, okay, but you've got to be able to explain to us and show us some of the bit under. And there's a good IP conversation to be had around that, in the sense of, if you're trying to bring us something where obviously it is genuinely world leading and we want to protect that, well, you should be able to do that in a safe way with us, because we are, you know, as a first point of government, we you know, we're going to manage and want to protect that IP. So yeah, I'm intrigued to know. I mean, Hugh, it would be quite interesting a little bit more about the specific example. I think Helen and I will both be keen to understand what the conversation was that would happened on that particular example. We are always going to want to test stuff and say, yeah, can we make it work? How do we make it work? But I think we really are up for, particularly with this technology space, recognizing that there is another good idea out there, and helping us connect the network is really, really important. And I would say we have done this. I mean, I can think of examples, certainly in the projects that I've been actively engaged in, where we've run challenges and people genuinely have brought stuff through the door. We've gone, oh, that's really interesting. We didn't thought of that before. Cool, let's see how it works, and having a, so I think it cuts both ways. It's us being open-minded, but it's also industry being able to share enough of the detail in a way that allows us to go, yeah, all right, actually that there probably is something behind that. Obviously, if you walk through the door with something that appears to defy the laws of physics,
Oh, I don't know if we have lost Pete.
I think we've lost sound on Pete. He's still there. Pete, can you hear us? Helen, are you still with us?
I'm still with you. I panicked for a moment because everything went quiet, so I thought it was my connectivity had gone.
Rob, should we carry on and keep things rolling, and then
we will do, and we'll try and get Pete back in. So pick it up as the next one then. So Helen, how do you plan to engage with like small and medium-sized businesses, especially the ones working on novel methods for testing and verification of machine learning systems?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think Pete was alluding to it on one of the previous questions, actually, that we're trying, you know, we've obviously got the big frameworks that are established at the moment, but we are actually trying to think about novel ways to engage other elements of the supplier base in a way that's favourable, or at least doesn't prevent them from being able to work with us. So, you know, as Pete says, there's things like the Dstl. We may bring back our data science challenge platform that we had, and we're trying to think of inventive ways to reach out. So certainly this year we're sort of concentrating on getting moving quickly, so trying to get this initiation phase up and running, so that we've got something to present at AI Fest. But certainly from about Christmas onwards, we will be thinking really hard about how we engage everybody. So, you know, you've got the AI lab email address. If you've got any brilliant ideas or any ideas of who we should be thinking about and perhaps what challenges they have for engagement with MOD, please email that address so that we at least know about the problem or the challenge, and we will try and get back to you as soon as we can. Over.
Thank you, Helen. I think for anyone on the call who isn't familiar, a couple of times we've mentioned DSL, the Defence and Security Accelerator. If you are unfamiliar with that, then it's certainly worth joining the commercial session, how to work with Dstl. It follows this one, and there'll be a presentation there from one of the team at DSL, and you know it's an increasing route that we in Dstl and other partners across the Ministry of Defence and other government departments are using as sort of the gateway into some of these programs, particularly for sort of novel and potentially unique innovation. So it's certainly worth checking that out following this session. Right, picking up with the questions. Question for Kevin Murphy. The regulatory environment and security constraints pose significant barriers to development and adoption of autonomous systems. What is Dstl doing to provide leadership in these areas?
Okay, so that would have been for Pete, but as looks like Pete's having a bit of issues with his internet, it's me. Right, so obviously, from I suppose from the point of view of the regulatory environment, the law is the law, and we have to comply with it. But you know, there's always been the approach that Dstl takes is that, you know, we've got the UK law, we've got MOD doctrine and policy of how MOD will act at home and abroad. But actually, you know, we can use science and technology and demonstrations of the benefit of the art of the potential to be able to challenge those ideas. So, you know, they're not fixed in time. We can, if we can show a great what am I trying to say? If we can show an alternative way to say that we are still abiding by the law, we're still working ethically, we're still working safely, we're not going to hurt anybody by the way we're working, we can challenge current policy and current doctrine. So I suppose, you know, it's another challenge back to industry to say, help us show the benefits of taking a different approach, help us show, understand what the advantage is, and you know, we can champion it. And that's always the way Dstl worked. Over.
Thanks, Helen. We are working to get Pete back, so I think he will be in the room shortly. So if we hold any of those questions that we think that he might want to address, then we will do that. So coming on to the next one, Helen, will again, if we think that Pete will pick up, we can move on. But okay. Steve Fry Harris says AI, autonomous vehicles, and developments such as Tempest have a significant demand on IT infrastructure and data center space. How is this supported? Is this something that we can go into?
Yep. So I think, you know, this is as I was trying to allude to right at the beginning of the presentation, you know, we are in a data rich world. So arguably just the way we live at the moment has created that problem of IT infrastructure, or even a reliance on it as well, and data center space. But actually that's probably one of the unique, perhaps one of the more unique requirements of MOD that we need to be able to, and again, as I was trying to allude to with some of the automating the ISR enterprise, be able to process that data perhaps on very small drives, you know, that could be on an autonomous system, and be able to just transmit across our infrastructure the really key elements of that. So this is what we call AI at the edge, that we need to be able to understand a way of doing it with minimal overheads and minimal supporting requirements. And I think that's one of the challenges that we're trying to put out to you. Now, of course, as well, you know, we're not in this alone. That S&T can obviously think about what the future could be and should be, but we're working hand in hand with MOD, with Defence Digital, in the way that they're actually digitising and improving the IT infrastructure and the data architectures and the data infrastructure that MOD runs as a whole. So, you know, we are thinking of these ideas, but they're not in isolation. We're thinking of them along with Defence Digital to be able to get that a reality across the enterprise as quickly as we can. Over.
Great. I think Pete, you're back in the room with us. Can you confirm?
I am, yes. Apologies, folks. The joys of the connected virtual network. Just therefore demonstrating how fragile this kind of environment is. There you go. Yes, I'm here.
Great. So I thought, you're making some really good points there about if we go back a step to some of that protecting the IP and bringing it. And you said you had experience of people bringing in things that you'd never seen before or never thought about. I wondered whether, just to put you on the spot, whether or not there was maybe an example or a bit more you could tell some of the audience today. Maybe an example of how you went around perhaps just sort of protecting some of that and how much they did have to show you and how not, just to sort of free it up in their mind sort of a bit clearly.
So the most obvious example, I guess, is bearing in mind, obviously, we're protecting people's IP. So I'm not going to give you a specific example, just in case. But obvious. So for things like where we've done, I mean, one of the ways is to use. So we use DEFCON 705. That leaves the IP with obviously the supplier. We may well want to say we've got user rights access around some of that. That's obviously a negotiation as we go through the conversation. I mean, ideally, what we want to do is, it's an interesting tension, isn't it? Leave the IP with the people who've developed it, because that gives you the ability to then exploit elsewhere. That helps us because it gives us amortization potentially across a wider exploited base. But what we need to know is what it does for us, how it works, and therefore what use we can make of it. So I think it's clearly a negotiation, but we do that routinely using DEFCON 705. The DASA open calls run that way, the theme competitions we run that way. There will be some things, and actually we'll pick this issue up, and I'm conscious of time, but there will be some things in this environment that for the future we will say actually it's probably best that that's government owned. Now I think we really want to do the conversation about things like interface standards, architectural definitions, autonomy behaviors. There's a really interesting one. So a lot of the really good thinking around, okay, how do these machines actually operate, comes out of a bunch of good thinking that people have invested in. But if we're going to release them into the wild to go do difficult things that might involve risk to either our personnel or other people's, okay, what's the framework we put around that to understand that that is a safe thing to do, and how do we manage that? So it is a real issue. We do need to think very hard about that as we move into this era of thinking machines. But we have the commercial frameworks that we need to make the IP preservation happen. We do it all the time. So I think I'd be interested to know if people don't think that's working or what else we would need to do. I'm conscious that DEFCON 705 means a lot to those people who are, or for even 703, for those people who are used to working with defence. We tried the short form contract in some challenges to try and take that into language where people who aren't used to working with defence and don't understand DEFCONs put it into language they can understand. I think now is a really good time to be having a conversation about what is the commercial model, what is the IP model, how do we work, and it is fundamental to how we're going to engage and exploit this technology base. So it's a very good and ripe conversation. Over.
Thank you, Pete. Now we're just going to come back to some questions that Helen had an initial response to, but we thought we'd give you the opportunity. So I don't know if you can see at the top of the screen the question from Kevin about that regulatory environment and the security constraints that pose significant barriers to the development and adoption of autonomous systems. So is there anything Dstl is doing in terms of providing some leadership in this area to get over those sort of
yeah. That's a great question. So Kevin, thanks very much. You'd noted us sort of, rather than just railing against it on the slide saying we have to solve this, what are you doing about it, Dstl? I like it. So the answer is, yeah, we're investing quite a lot of research activity. There are some key players in this space who are engaged with, for example, the autonomous vehicle community through CCAV, for example, working in partnership with UKRI and others and BAYS to say, well, okay, what do we do about what's the commercial sector moving? The CAA has recently set up some changes to the regulation to allow certain drone activities and the BVLE loss corridors that are starting to open up. So we are routinely and regularly engaged with those. We are running projects that are and engaging our own regulatory authorities. I'm obviously going to say Mosquito is one where we are deliberately, bringing in the regulatory community via the DNS team and the MAA into that conversation right at the get-go, because we need to understand what the art of the possible is. We aren't going to fix it overnight. There are some things about technology and how we manage to develop it and how we put the right frameworks around that are a part of the challenge. Part of it is experiential, getting systems out into the wilds, into the user community, to show that we can understand how to operate these things safely in a controlled way before we, take the red button off. So we are trying to put some leadership in. Obviously, we are not the regulatory community, so we're trying to advise them on smarter ways of doing it and some opportunities. Again, there are software approaches, digital environment development. What can we draw from that? How do we use synthetic environment, for example, to provide evidence into use cases as part of the body of evidence? There is, people are doing that. There is work in train to do that. So we are trying to think about some of these issues. Again, good ideas, always welcome. Over.
Thank you. We've also answered the question from Stephen. So if we move on to the third one, which is now the second one, you mentioned that Dstl was working with industry to supply some core components into the AI experimentation hub. How is this being done, and how can SMEs engage with you at the build stage? Helen.
Okay, yep. So as I mentioned, at the moment, we're just in an, I can't even say this word, an initiation phase, where we're trying to get the very key elements of the AI hub up and running, and then obviously we need to build out for the other teams, so such as the V&V team that I was talking about and the experimentation team that I was talking about. We need to build those other teams and work out how they're going to be governed, how they're going to interact with each other. And those are later stages that we're going to do. So hopefully, again, I know I'm putting it off to October, but AI Fest will be the hopefully will be the opportunity where we can explain all of that and show you how to get involved. And as I said again before, we've largely used some of the established frameworks at the moment just for speed, but we do plan very quickly, so sort of as soon as we've done AI Fest, to work out how we're going to reach out to a wider community. So it is a case, I'm afraid, at the moment of watch this space. But if you think you've got something very specific or very unique that you can offer us, then of course we're interested in that. So again, please use that AI email address. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think it's one for both of you. You both know about some of the work that's going on here. So how are we going to solve legal issues about using AI on the battlefield? And I think to some degree that also relates to sort of autonomous systems as well. So Helen, do you want to pick up first?
Yeah, I think largely a lot of it is as I said before, that we're just as bound by the law as anybody else is. But if we can show evidence that perhaps a change in the law or sort of a change in policy or doctrine is needed, then we can at least go through the routes of being able to challenge the current status quo. But other than that, it's going back to the whole thing about we need to be able to be assured of the outputs of the AI and the autonomous system through the testing and experimentation. Sorry, Pete, carry on.
No, that's fine. I was going to pick up on this. So yeah, we're obviously bound by UN and the conventions and so on, are the ones we've signed up to, certainly. So it's interesting. So the question's an interesting one, which is how are you going to solve the legal issues around these? So the answer is, well, we're not, we Dstl are not. We're going to put some advice in around ways in which we can help understand how the technology can be framed in an ethically and safe way for operation bound by the laws. Of course, I'd almost throw it back, again, back at how we as a community are going to deal with the challenge of using AI in the environment. We're very clear from a UK perspective that, there will be a human in the decision making around the application of lethal effect. That is our person. We've said that. So it's an interesting question about what do we think the legal issues are? Where are the challenges? Where are the we aren't the only people in defence facing the challenge around what are we going to let a machine make a decision about? Look at the self-driving car market, of course, as the obvious nearest example. So it is a question. I think it's getting under the skin of what is the actual issue we're talking about. That is for the lawyers to decide. And obviously in the MOD, the Defence Autonomy Unit act as the policy hub around helping shape and advise in terms of what Defence's position around this in concert with the lawyers. But what we collectively can do as the technical community is help people understand what the boundaries around the technology can and can't do, and make sure people are clear about what the premises are that we're trying to deal with. And some of that, as Helen's alluded to, is experiential and involves experimentation, as well as some of the smart things we might be able to do to help put controls in place where that's the right thing to do. Of course. Over.
Thank you both. I think it's also worth just saying on that, I think the Secretary of State for Defence and others have been sort of on the record in public about international collaboration and work that's going on at sort of a top international level with allies on some of this stuff as well. So I think it's just worth saying, just putting that out there as well. And I'm sure there'll be, as we develop and grow through this sort of stuff, there'll be more coming from at a top level as well. Okay. Moving on to the next question from Andrew Gordon at BAE. How is Defence addressing the underpinning data and information infrastructure to enable AI, and how does it see integration and interoperability with industry?
Shall I go first, Pete?
I assumed you might do. You have done so far, so that's fine. Yes, because you might want to talk about one. Well, we might want to talk about the core elements that we've talked about in the hub, of course. But I'm going to let you do that, and then we can talk about some other bits and pieces. So yeah, go ahead.
Yep, sure. Okay, so as I alluded to with one of the questions there, obviously we've had a really huge focus on digital regeneration of MOD and digital architectures, etc., and that's still actually going on under our Chief Information Officer, Charlie Forte, at the moment. So we are working very closely with MOD, with Defence Digital, in their whole revolutionising of the defence area. Sorry, the digital area. So what have we done? So I suppose, for those that don't perhaps know, a little bit of a history lesson, a lot of the S&T that we've done over the last sort of 10 years has driven that digital strategy that's been produced, and some of the work that MOD at the Defence Digital are doing at the moment. So actually a lot of the ideas and current thinking behind the data architectures have come out of the research programme, and really keen and happy and proud to see that that's happened, because we're bringing MOD up to a point where they are really ready to embrace the massive data challenge that we've got, and to be able to use AI and autonomous systems far more effectively. So and obviously this is always a moving world, so we're always watching and trying to understand the commercial advances in data and data management and information infrastructures, and to be able to apply them where possible. We don't want a bespoke system only to MOD. We want to be able to use open standards. We want to be able to use common industry standards, so that we can truly have the evergreen plug and play model that MOD wants. So integration and interoperability with industry. Again, this is sort of a think piece that we're currently doing with Defence Digital at the moment, but we are very much wanting to sort of have an approach that our American counterparts in the JAIC had, where industry and academia can bring models to us, or bring models to us and actually use a data set that we might have. And so we might actually have to give you some sort of like interface control document or something to be able to come and use it. But if we're using open standards, then hopefully that's not going to be an issue. So sort of come to the premises, wherever that may be, play with it, show us the experiment with it, be able to see the results together as a team, and then decide where we're going to go from there. Does it need to go back and be reiterated, or can it actually then go out on exercise with the frontline commands, etc., to be further verified? So that's the idea we've got. So I suppose a simple answer is it's ever evolving. We're trying to keep up with industrial advances, and we're trying to be as open as possible for anybody to come and work with us, but being very mindful, as Pete said a couple of times, that you come and work with us and we will protect your IP, we will protect your ideas. We won't leak that to competitors. Pete, did you want to have a go?
Well, it's a great question, isn't it? It is the question at the heart of how on earth do you get all this stuff to actually function. So, and I think what I would say is that we recognise, data, exactly as it says, the data and information issue at the heart of this, and it is a core component of the investment we're putting into the Defence AI Centre. And that's really why the whole digital foundry idea and the very strong push from Defence Digital is absolutely at the heart of what we're doing with standing the centre up, because it doesn't work unless we solve some of these challenges. So I don't think we're all going to promise it's going to be easy and we're going to fix it overnight, but I think there's a very strong focus to say defence needs to get its act together around data. CSA herself has said that this is a core challenge in terms of trying to stand up. So we absolutely recognise that the whole challenge around data set management, how do you cohere it, how do you comb it, all of that is stuff that we really are focused on. So you will see that as a very strong focus for enabling and putting in place the underpinning architecture for the centre, so it can then do some of the other stuff it needs to do. So we've absolutely got the message, and yeah, we're up for that conversation, as Helen said, about how you guys see that, well, how you can contribute. And actually, from going back to Andrew, thank you. I had the conversation with the team only at the start of this week about BA Systems ideas around that. So we welcomed that. So thank you. Over.
Thank you. We're coming sort of rapidly to the end of the session. Probably time for another question or two. So if we take the next one then. So there is another challenge facing small and medium-sized enterprises to gain access to relevant data sets in sufficient volume and provenance to develop AI technologies. So how will the AI lab help to provide this data? Helen.
Yeah, that's always the perennial problem for everyone. So I think, first off, I'm going to sort of perhaps maybe a little bit tongue-in-cheek of your question of saying, actually, we don't have access to data sets of the best quality or veracity or velocity to be able to train data sets on properly. And perhaps that is a fact of the real world of where MOD is operating. That, as I said before, our data sets are incomplete, they're unlabeled, etc., etc. So, in a way, that's why we're trying to look at some of the low shot learning or other ways of being able to train and then verify data algorithms or AI against that data. But being more sensible about it as well, that we are working quite hard with Defence Digital and the frontline commands to be able to start to have a sort of a repository of relevant data or representative data that we can then carve up, that for usual experimentation purposes. Some of it will be for training, some of it will be for verification and validation. And as I said before, sort of trying to learn best practice from our US colleagues, we will probably keep a number of data sets in that type of style of separated out areas and allow you to come and train against it. I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where we'll post you a CD of a data set. I think it will be that the data set will be on premises, as it were, and you bring the tool to us. But that's certainly what we're working through. We acknowledge that without the data, pretty much none of this is going to happen. So yes, that's something that we're working really hard on at the moment. Pete?
Well, it's a great link question, isn't it, to the conversation we were just having, and I do think so. We don't own and won't have access to all the data. One of the challenges here is that, well, the data set is potentially huge. And actually, my question back would be, how are you going to help by bringing us the data? And then I'm going to go back to my IP conversation and say, okay, let's have a conversation about which bits you think you need to own, which bits you think we need to own, and how are we collectively going to manage the challenge of how on earth you provide suitable training sets for some of this really smart software stuff, and how we're going to work together to do that. So I think there's a really good question about, yes, I'd love to see the fact that there might be some coherent sets we could provide back out, and we might well do that, and indeed we have done that for some cases for some of the challenges we've run. I think I'd also ask the question about, how are you going to help us by bringing your data into the party and provide us with the IP position to enable them to be able to share that more widely. Would be a good conversation to do. Over.
Not sure if we've lost.
How are we
Rob.
doing on time, Rob?
Not sure if we've lost Rob.
Have we lost Rob?
Oh, apologies, or I've been speaking to myself. So I was just saying, I think that's a good time to wrap things up with where we are on time. And thank you to Helen, thank you to Peter, thank you to everybody who signed in today. And Simon, I'll hand over to you just to wrap up as we head into the final session of today. But thank you very much for your participation today.
Great, thanks very much, Rob, and of course, thank you to Helen and Pete. So that does draw to a close this final plenary session. For those that have noticed, I've put the details in the chat for the final main conference session, which will really be on the commercial element on how you can work with Dstl. So that's where all of the plenaries come back together. So that is in 8 minutes time. So it just needs me to say thank you very much, and we will reconvene in a few minutes. Bye bye.